Hello, everyone. This is the 204th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I welcome back author and freelance football writer Mr. George Tsitsonis as we discuss the Greece national team during the 1994 World Cup. Mr. Tsitsonis was on the podcast about a year ago discussing the 2004 Euros adventure, and he's the author of Achieving the Impossible, the remarkable story of Greece's Euro 2004 victory. He has written for the likes of 442 Magazine, FIFA Publications, 442.com, Soccer International Magazine, Inside Soccer Magazine, and Inside Football, among others. Well, George, welcome back.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, it's great to be back. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So, in our last discussion on the 2004 Euros, we touched up on the history of Greek football. Now, for this discussion, can you describe the status of Greek football domestically and international level in the early 90s with the 1980 Euros being their sole presence in the finals of the tournament prior to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just as you said, for Greek football, that was pretty much the one shining moment to speak of at the national team level was the 1980s Euros being at that tournament. That was up until the 1994 World Cup. That was the only international competition Greece had qualified for. So looking back at that time period, looking at the 80s and 90s, Greece was probably would be considered a sort of second or third tier European nation at the national team level, certainly capable of going toe to toe with some of the top European nations, and results suggest some of that as time went on. However, just too much inconsistency, not a very well organized football federation, which kind of kept the national team from being able to sort of progress further to qualify for competitions and whatnot, despite really possessing a lot of talented players through the years. So yeah, so if we look back at that period of time, it's probably similar to the club scene where not much has changed. It was dominated by the teams centered around Athens, as well as PAOK and Aris in the north of the country in Thessaloniki. Greek teams did okay here and there in UEFA club competitions, but again, nothing really to speak of, with the exception of Panathinaikos making the final in the early 70s in the European Cup. Like kind of the same old story. A lot of talent, a lot of potential. However, not really able to make a lot of breakthroughs during that time.
Just like our 2004 Euros discussion, there were really no international stars. A few years before, in the 80s, you had Nikos Anastopoulos play the season in the Italian Serie A at Avellino, while in the current squad, Dimitris Saravakos was somewhat known, but only to connoisseurs mostly. So, what can you say about the better known Greek players around this time?
Like you said, the better known Greek players were simply unknown to most casual observers of the game. They would be, as you said, maybe connoisseurs, maybe people that were really into the sport that had maybe an interest in Greek football that would have known some of those names you speak of. Saravakos, a member of that 1994 World Cup team, probably was the highest profile name in Greek football at the time. However, you'd really have to strain for people to know anybody in Greek soccer at the Greek football at the time. The borders hadn't really opened up for Greek players yet. So as far as players now who are just widespread throughout Europe, even Greeks, that just simply wasn't the case. It wasn't until a few years after the 94 World Cup where Greek players started to test the waters. Clubs decided that, especially in those early days, that these might be good, cheap options for players to pick up. Yorgos Donis was the first Greek player to play in the Premier League a couple of years after the 94 World Cup. And then that kind of started a sequence of events where players really started to kind of go to England, go to Spain, Italy followed, and other leagues. So again, there was just not much exposure as far as Greek players during that period of time. And there's other talented individuals. Nikos Maklas, who was part of that team, would make a name for himself in European football a little bit later after this tournament. But, you know, you look at the squads for the 1994 World Cup, Greece was one of only four countries that did not have a single player playing abroad. Two of those were Italy and Spain, and that kind of is a testament back then to the strength of their leagues. but the other two were Greece and Saudi Arabia. So I think that says something as far as Greek players being a pretty much an unknown quantity during that period of time.
Can you describe the trajectory of Greece manager Alketas Panagoulias as a player and a manager up to this point, the common link being the 1980s Euro adventure?
Panagoulias is coached the Greek national side on 3 different occasions. He began as a player for Aris in the northern part of Greece, like I said, in the second largest country of Thessaloniki. He ended up moving to the United States, where he played semi-professional football for Greek American Atlas, and then kind of started his coaching career to some level there. He ended up going back to Greece and becoming an assistant manager for the national team before taking over as manager in 1973. And that was the first of his 3 stints with the team. He led Greece to the 1980s Euros. He was very well thought of in Greek football at the time, and he had a club career as a manager of some distinction as well, winning titles with Olympiacos and sort of kind of gaining a very positive reputation in the Greek game. After being away from the national team for a period of time, about 12 years, in 1992, the decision was made to bring him back. And he repeated the trick. He helped Greece qualify for the 94 World Cup. So the first 2 tournaments Greece ever participated in at the national team level was thanks to Panagoulias leading that side.
As qualification campaigns go, Greece qualified relatively comfortably for this 1994 World Cup. But geopolitical events, in a way, helped their cause. Can you summarize this qualification phase?
Yeah, so Greece's qualifying group for the 1994 World Cup initially included Yugoslavia, along with Russia, Hungary, Iceland, and Luxembourg. Because of UN sanctions against Yugoslavia, they were unable to participate in the qualifications. So a 16 group went to 5, and there was 2 automatic places to be had there. So in Greece at the time, it was seen as a remarkable opportunity because obviously Yugoslavia had a rich history of obviously producing great players, but also making international tournaments. So with them out of the way, it was really anybody's kind of battle for second place. The thought was that Russia would kind of take first in the group, and then you were essentially battling against the likes of Hungary, Iceland, and Luxembourg for a spot at the World Cup. And what happened was, it was obviously an easier qualification path because without Yugoslavia there, they'd really eliminated potentially the top team in that group. But Greece they started a little bit slow as far as performances, but really grew as the qualification went on. And I think probably propelled with this sense of we could make this. And no disrespect to the likes of Hungary, Iceland, or Luxembourg, but Greece being maybe a similar tier team at that point, they thought they were on an even playing field of those teams and could advance. So I believe after the first couple of victories were picked up, it really kind of spurred the team on. They ended up topping the group, beating Russia in the group finale. And it was certainly, I wouldn't say easy for Greece just because they had never done anything like this, but obviously the whole process made easier by the fact that Yugoslavia had been excluded.
And they finished unbeaten in this qualification group. And in fact, the qualification process had started under Antonis Georgiadis, but in June of 92, Panagoulias is appointed to manage the team. As far as yourself, where were you in life at this point and the extent of your football fandom?
Well, I was 15 years old during 1994, and in the lead up to that tournament, I mean, I was just sky high optimism that Greece was going to do big things at this tournament. I think it was the first, I had watched the 1990 World Cup, but football in the United States was just really starting to turn the corner as far as popularity goes. We were finally starting to get a decent amount of content on television. So that all came kind of to a peak during that time period for me. It was certainly, looking back, a very exciting time in my life as a football fan because it was the first real tournament that I was able to closely follow the lead up, the actual tournament itself, and to have one of my 2 countries, as far as my heritage goes, participating, both my countries, but Greece having never really been to a World Cup before. I was on cloud 9. I was very, very excited about how things would work out. I've always been an optimist, which sometimes if you're a football supporter, it can leave you down quite a bit. But yeah, I was I was very excited leading into that tournament. And I just thought with Greece's group and things like that, that they had a real chance to make some noise during USA 94.
Were you able to gauge the euphoria back home?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of friends and family, so we were constantly kind of talking in the lead up. And, I had been to Greece pretty much every summer in the years leading up to it. So there was this real palpable feeling of excitement back in Greece. We'd get a Greek newspaper that was produced here in the United States, the National Herald, still produced to this day. And it's a daily, and we get it a day late where I live in New Hampshire, but you could just sense from the media coverage, from speaking to people back in Greece, that this was Greece's biggest ever moment as far as, and there was just a lot of excitement all around it, a lot of sort of, I guess, along with me, just a lot of maybe unrealistic optimism. There was talk about how far this team could go without really maybe understanding that maybe we weren't quite at that level yet to be having those huge dreams.
Yes, and after the World Cup draw, Greece was in a group with Argentina, Bulgaria, and Nigeria, based in Boston and Chicago. So, did that in any way change your expectations, that knowledge, or you were just excited because Greece had qualified?
I mean, we were excited that Greece had qualified, but you have to remember this was a 24-team tournament with 16 teams advancing to the knockout stage. So you had this feeling that even as a third place side, you really had a chance to go through. So I don't think there were many teams, many supporters of countries in that tournament that felt like they had no chance. Because if you get a victory, as we know in setups like this, you're in with a shot to advance as one of the better third place teams. So, we looked at that group, and obviously Greece has never been at a World Cup tournament, and that Argentina is a massive name. So maybe you're thinking, okay, Argentina is obviously going to kind of lead this group. But then you look at the likes of Bulgaria and Nigeria, and you think maybe we can get some points in these games and go through. I think the second game against Bulgaria was the one that people really had sort of circled as one that was kind of do or die for Greece. If you could get a victory in that game, then you play everything against Nigeria. And again, you're looking at maybe 3 or 4 points, or then you have a shot. So the draw, I think, on a personal level, but I feel as far as the coverage that I was able to see and looking back, the draw was favorable for Greece as things stood at that time period. Now, we obviously know history shows us that Bulgaria had an amazing tournament. Nigeria turned heads as well. So it wasn't maybe as not easy, but it wasn't maybe as manageable as it looked like in the beginning. And we know, obviously, from Greece's performance as well, that they were not up to that standard to contest going to the next round. But initially, the draw seemed like something that you could compete to get through that group.
And to put things in perspective, like you said, no one expected Bulgaria to do as well as they did. And in
Right.
fact, in their entire World Cup history, they had still not won a single game during the finals. And
Exactly.
yeah, Greece would be the first team they would defeat.
Right.
Now, we already mentioned the likes of Maklas and Saravakos. Who are some of the other players forming the backbone of this team?
Well, I guess if we start at the back, a longtime goalkeeper for the team was Andonis Minou. Defensively, Stelios Manolas, Stratos Apastoulakis were two players that were well known in Greek football circles at the time. Moving forward in midfield, Nikos Noplias, who played for Panathinaikos and Ofi, was sort of a real energetic force in midfield. Panagiotis Tsalouchidis, Tassos Mitropoulos, once again, midfielders that had kind of been playing in Greek football at the highest level domestically that were kind of highly renowned. We talked about Maklas, but there was also the likes of Alekos Alexandris, who later went on to have a really good club career and scored some key goals for the national team as well over time. And again, there was a lot of players that, for Greek football fans, very well known midfielders like Minos Hadjidis. And so there was, as far as Greek football fans went, there was always going to be arguments about who should have gone, but there was a feeling as though there was enough quality there to compete at that level.
Now, the preparation friendlies were rather unimpressive and average. What was the general reaction following these matches?
Well, the early friendlies just after 1994, the ones happened in March and April against the likes of Poland and Saudi Arabia. We looked at those games, 0-0 draw against Poland and then a 5-1 victory over the Saudis. And there was a sort of feeling of, okay, things seem to be kind of going on a decent path here. And remember, this was a Saudi Arabia team that ended up going to the round of 16 at that 1994 World Cup. So while it kind of gets tossed to the side now as far as, well, it obviously wasn't a very good result, I think it showed that when Greece was kind of organized and really focused on the challenge, they were able to put together some good football. Unfortunately, by the time May of 1994 arrived, due to probably a few different factors, there was a real dip in the results. 3-0 defeat at home to Cameroon was roundly criticized. The Greek team was roundly criticized in the press for that result. It was followed up by a really sort of paltry 0-0 draw against Bolivia. And then things got a little worse. They went to England before they traveled to the United States for preparations for the tournament, played England at Wembley, England who had failed to qualify for that particular tournament, and lost 5-0. So the warning bells were starting to ring as May sort of approached. There was some real sort of discussion in Greece about the team selection, the squad selection. There was a real focus on older players that seemed to kind of be veterans who had helped maybe Greece over the last decade, who maybe were, the criticism was they were rewarded for their sort of time with the national team by having a place in the squad. People really thought that there were other younger players that could have come to the fore that would have helped this team. Vasilis Tsartas is a player who went on to win the Euros with Greece in 2004 and also had a really solid club career. He played in Spain. And there was a handful of others, that players, Yorgos Donis, who I mentioned before, who went on to play for Blackburn just 2 years later, was omitted from the squad. A couple older wingers were in his place, good players, but the feeling was maybe that Panagoulias had missed out on something. And that started to kind of get louder and louder as the tournament crept closer. Here in the States, there was a 2-0 defeat to Colombia, a 1-1 draw against the hosts, the United States. It wasn't enough to kind of dispel the notion that there were some warning signs here that maybe Greece was going to struggle.
So let's look at the final 22 selected by Alketas Panagoulias. For the goalkeepers, at number 1, we have Antonis Minou of Apollon Athens. Number 15, Christos Karkamanis from Aris Salonika. Number 20, Ilias Atmatsidis from AEK. For defenders, number 2, we have Stratos Apostolakis of Panathinaikos. Number 3, Thanasis Kolitsidakis from Panathinaikos. Number 4, Stelios Manolas from AEK. Number 5, Yannis Kalintzakis from Panathinaikos. Number 13, Vaios Karayanis from AEK. Number 17, Minas Hanzitis from Olympiakos. Number 18, Kyriakos Karaitidis from Olympiakos. And number 21, Alexandros Alexandris from AEK. Midfielders, we have Iotis Salouhidis from Olympiakos, number 6. Number 8, Nikos Nioblias from Panathinaikos. Number 10, Tassos Mitropoulos from AEK. Number 11, Nikos Tsiantakis of Olympiakos. Number 12, Spiros Marangos from Panathinaikos. Number 19, Savas Kofidis from Aris Salonika. Number 22, Alexandros Alexiou from PAOK. And for strikers, Dimitris Saravakos of Panathinaikos at number 7. Number 9, Nikos Machlas of OFI Crete. Number 14, Vasilis Dimitriadis of AEK. And number 16, Alexandros Alexoudis of OFI Crete. The first match in the World Cup is against Argentina of Diego Maradona. This match is on June 21st at Boston at Foxborough Stadium.
I was at that game.
So for this match, we have the following lineup for Greece: Minou, Manolas, Apostolakis, Kalintzakis, Kolitsidakis, Salouhidis, Nioblias, Kofidis, Tsiantakis. He'd be replaced by Marangos in the second half, 46 minute. Captain of the team, Saravakos, Machlas, and he'd be replaced by Mitropoulos in the 58th minute. Now, for Argentina team, apart from Maradona, you have other familiar names: Fernando Redondo, Claudio Caniggia, Gabriel Batistuta, Diego Simeone, among others. So right up from the starting gate, Gabriel Batistuta opens the scoring in the second minute, and it was all downhill from there. In the 45th minute, he scores the second goal from the long-range shot. Then you have the magical moment in the 60th minute when Maradona scores and he runs straight to the camera. And just before the end, Batistuta scores his hat trick with a penalty kick. The first match A heavy loss. Already it looked bleak for Greece. But tell me about your experience watching this match.
I mean, I was, like this was just such a huge moment for me. I was there with my dad and a couple friends, and we were sitting in the rafters of the old Foxborough Stadium, but it did not matter. We were so excited to be there. My dad is, I write about this in my book, just in the sort of beginning pages, but he's the exact opposite of me, usually a pretty big pessimist or maybe more of a realist. But he had allowed himself to kind of get drawn into this belief that Greece could do something at this tournament despite all the kind of lead up and all the stories we were hearing about maybe things weren't so great in the camp and things like that. But I'll never forget the look on his face when Batistuta scored 2 minutes in, and it was just like, I've definitely been duped here and won't let that happen again. It was obviously a wonderful feeling entering the stadium, seeing Greeks chanting and Argentines next to them, and kind of the back and forth and the banter and things. The game itself was obviously, for a Greek supporter, a big disappointment. Just never really in the game. They were chasing shadows for most of that match. And it looked like a team that was not prepared in any way, shape, or form to compete at that level. They had been in the United States for about 40 days, and it didn't show. What showed was the problems in the lead up that were talked about, as far as problems within the camp, problems with the manager, being sort of privy to needing to be at all these events with the Greek American community. It seemed to wear on this team, and they just looked very unorganized, slow. You're talking about the oldest team at that tournament. There were only 3 players in Greece's squad that were under the age of 25, and they looked like it. They just looked like a team that was really reliant on old legs, and they were just too slow on pretty much every kind of piece of the pitch.
Well, on June 26th at Chicago at the Soldier Field, they face Bulgaria of Risto Stoichkov. And it will be just like the match against Argentina. Now, for this match, there were some changes. In goal started Ilias Atmatsidis. Apostolakis was captain of the team in the absence of Saravakos. We have Kalinzakis, Kariayanis, Karataidis, Marangos, Nioblias, Hansidis. He'll be replaced by Mitropoulos in the 47th minute. Kofidis, Machlas, Alexoudis, and he'll be replaced by Dimitriadis in the 57th minute. Just like the previous match, Bulgaria takes an early lead in the 5th minute. Alexoudis handled in a box, and Risto Stoichkov scored from a penalty kick. Then we have to wait until the second half in the 55th minute, another penalty kick after Atsamidis had fouled Sirakov in the box, and Stoichkov again scored from a penalty kick. In the 66th minute, Bulgaria scored their third goal from Lechkov. And in the very last minute, Stoichkov takes a free kick. Atamidis parries it, but Daniil Borimorov knocks in the rebound. And another 4-0 loss. And like I said, this was Bulgaria's first ever win in a World Cup match. The World Cup was over already.
Yeah, I mean, I think after the Argentina game, I won't say that hopes were still high. It was probably like, okay, we're in trouble. But there's the sense that, okay, we're playing Bulgaria. It's a team near our level. Anything can happen in a match. So if we can manage to get something out of that, then we'll have hope going into the group stage finale. Again, you just saw all the signs of a team not prepared to enter a turn like this. Early goals, late goals scored, focus was just absent, penalties given up, just kind of all over the place. I don't think Panagoulias did himself or the squad many favors, made quite a few changes, so the team looked very sort of unsettled from the start again. It might have seemed natural to make a few changes after the first match, but I think it just kind of went to another level, and you're constantly looking like you got new faces all around you, not a lot of cohesion really to be able to kind of build something as the tournament went on. And just as you said, 2 games in, 0 goals scored, 8 conceded, and already you realize that you're going home early.
The last match was inconsequential for Greece. On June 30th at Boston at Foxborough Stadium, they faced Nigeria. A new lineup this time. So this time, Christos Karkamanis starts in goal. Alexandros Alexiou, Kalinzakis, Karianis, Hansidis, Saluhidis, Nioblias, Kofidis, Mitropoulos captaining this time. He'd be replaced by Tsiantakis in the 72nd minute. Alexandris, Machlas, and he'd be replaced by Dimitriadis in the 71st minute. This match, Greece did slightly better. They lost 2-0 in the 45th minute. Finidi George scored, chipping over Karkamanix from just outside of the box. And again, another last minute goal, this time from Daniel Amokachi, again with a shot from outside of the box. This was by far the most disastrous performance of any of the teams at the World Cup. What was the consensus as far as the reasons from the locals?
Yeah, I think for the most part, there was a lot of people having a go at Panagulias. Again, the manager will take a lot of that heat sometimes when something goes that disastrously. The players were not free of blame, but I think most of what in the immediate aftermath of those three matches and the way things were handled, at least how they were seen from further away, was that the sort of main culprit was Panagulias. I think history kind of tells us that it goes a little bit deeper than that, but at that point in time, his name was the one that was plastered on the headlines of Greek papers and things like that. Again, the players too, they got their fair share of blame on some level, but Panagulias had to take the heat after those three games because it, like you said, it was just such a disastrous showing. It was not when Greece went to the 1980 Euros, they drew one match and they lost two, but the general consensus was that they were competitive and they had given a decent showing of themselves. You couldn't say the same for Greece at the 1994 World Cup. And so what started as this sort of special moment in Greek football history ended really in shame and embarrassment. And a lot of that was directed at the manager.
Now, during this World Cup, all three goalkeepers played in each match. Every player of the 22-man squad played in each match. Now, that in a way can be explained because I think in the last match with the team already eliminated, perhaps Panagoulias wanted to give everyone a run in the World Cup. But still, you had a different player captaining the side in each match. So, all this instability, does that speak for itself?
Yeah, I think so. And again, when you look at the accusations before the tournament started of players being selected because of their service as a sort of recognition of their years for the national team, not necessarily based on their current form or what they would be able to bring to the table at this tournament. You look at what happened in the US and for Greece, and you realize that after a little while, did it seem as though we just wanted to get these players on to be able to say that they played at a World Cup? And Panagoulias, I'm sure, had a big heart. So I think you would be hard pressed to find people that were managing that, went into that third game with not a lot to play for and being like, okay, we're going to give these guys a run out. So I can see that. I think that between the first and second games maybe is where some criticism is warranted because again you kind of you take a bunch of players out and you just throw a bunch more in to think that those changes are gonna stick. It's a big risk, and when it doesn't pay off, you're going to look bad. So for me, it's not necessarily just the fact that he ended up playing Karkamanis as the third goalkeeper and others in that third game. It's sort of indicative, though, of how the tournament was managed by Greece and Panagoulias in particular.
Remember reading that Panagoulias stated that his players were just happy to be on the same field as Maradona. Do you remember this quote, or and was this a reflection of Greece's problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does say something to that effect. I do remember that. But once again, you look at a country like Greece who at that period of time, no players are playing in Europe as far as national team players or anybody, they're all playing in their domestic league. They're coming up against kind of star names once in a while in European competitions, once in a while for the national team. But a player at the level of Maradona, the sort of high profile name and history that a player like that brings, it would have only been natural for them to be going to the World Cup and thinking, oh my God, we're going to be on the same field with Maradona. When again, and that's nothing to say of these players that they didn't have hopes, they didn't have dreams, they didn't have expectations of themselves to go and compete at a World Cup. I think it shows, though, that they maybe were not necessarily in awe, but this was a huge occasion for them and without any experience whatsoever in the past of anything like it. So it's no surprise that maybe they had looked at some of the players participating in that tournament and maybe thinking in that way.
Now, you already mentioned this. There were some criticisms that Panagoulias' time in America was spent largely on glad handling influential Greek Americans and not enough on tactics. Was there any truth to this?
I can't say for sure on this, and I'm not going to say that about Panagulios because I'm not sure who made these decisions. If I was hard pressed to state it, and from the research that I've done, I think the Greek Football Federation bears a huge amount of responsibility for what happened when the national team was in the United States. I think that many of those events that were set up were not necessarily set up by the manager, but were
Right.
sort of events planned with the participation of the Greek Football Federation. And I was reading some archived stuff the other day. There were reports in Greek media of up to 184 members of people loosely affiliated with the Greek Football Federation that were made the trip to the United States. And so
Wow.
these players and the manager were surrounded by tons of people, tons of influences. Reports of these players afterwards suggested that they felt like they were being dragged every night to some new party, to some new event, and they loved the Greek American community. They were always, even after the tournament, talking about how supportive they were and how much love they received from them. However, these players did not feel as though they were in the United States to prepare for a World Cup. They felt as though they were sort of kind of here to pay tribute to the Greek diaspora and the people here that were there to support them. But you could see that there was so much attention put forth to kind of attend these sort of events and things. Training and other stuff seemed to take a back seat. And obviously, I think you could make the case that we're going to have this event one night or whatever, we're going to invite or two or whatever. But for a team that was supposed to be here for 40 days and really be able to have time to train, to get used to the conditions, I don't think the focus was there. And I think that a lot of that blame, if not everything, goes to the Greek Football Federation during that period of time.
And linking it to your book, was this in any way a reference point to serve as a cautionary tale to improve standards?
The short answer is no. I mean, we look at Greece following this tournament. There was no huge wholesale changes that we can think of. There was nothing that was done from the federation or at the grassroots level in Greece to sort of change things. There was no attention really paid on that. So I would say no initially. It obviously was a tournament that is always going to be a sort of nightmare tale of what happens when you don't properly prepare yourself to go and compete against the best. It took Greek football a lot of time to recover from this. And when they qualified for their next tournament, which was Euro 2004, that 1994 tournament was still in the memory. There was trauma still there from the players, from the people surrounding the team, but also from supporters. I remember at that tournament leading up to it, the expectations were, let's just score a goal. Let's get a goal. Let's get a point, because we were not able to celebrate a goal or a point at USA 94. We just don't want to go and get embarrassed. So I think that was maybe the lasting legacy of this tournament. Unfortunately, nothing concrete was sort of done in response to it. We have stories in the past of, for instance, I think it was Germany after their sort of poor performance at Euro 2000, where there was sort of a rethink of how German football should be structured, the way development occurs. Greek football did nothing like that in response to the 1994 World Cup. I think the easy way out was to blame the manager. The easy way out was to suggest that we took too many old players. And again, there might be parts to those things that are true, and then maybe everybody has a piece of criticism that should be sort of levied against them. But there was more to it, and unfortunately, it was not something that was looked at analytically and thought, okay, how can we improve this?
Yeah, and what was the reception of the players and the staff once they returned?
Yeah, I mean, you can just imagine that there was not anybody really waiting at the airport to
Mm.
greet this team. In fact, media reports seemed to get worse. They would talk about how when the players came back, they had huge suitcases full of Timberland equipment and other things, gear and stuff they had bought in the U.S. and that, they were trying to portray the players as having gone on a big shopping spree and whatnot. So the coverage got worse and worse. I remember still reading articles maybe 2 months afterwards, still talking about what had gone wrong and trying to lay blame. Panagoulias did not return in the immediate aftermath of that, so there was criticism against him for that. He had stayed in the U.S., I believe. I'm not 100% on that fact, but I'm pretty sure I came across reading that, so don't quote me on that. But I believe that was the story. And again, the criticism just kept on getting levied day after day against all involved with this side. But in my opinion, not enough criticism went to maybe the Greek Football Federation, because the conditions in which this team was sent to the U.S. and what transpired, I think, is a story that should be told, and one that would really, I think, spotlight where most of the blame should lay.
As far as the players were concerned, Nikos Maklas seems to have been the only one who made a fair stab of his career abroad. He went to Vitesse in the Netherlands and later to Ajax. Were there any other such players, or do you think most of them were mostly victims of this adventure?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the players were victims of that adventure. Also, some of the more well-known names in the squad were older. So the likes of Saravakos, Mitropoulos, Manolas, those players ended up stepping away from the national team either in the immediate aftermath of that tournament or really sooner rather than later. In their place came a lot of young players that kind of bolstered the team for the next decade, some of who went on to play for Greece in that next sort of few months, went on to be part of the Euro 2004 team. So it was a transitionary sort of period. When you're looking at several players over the age of 30 that were in that squad, it's just natural that, especially how in light of how the tournament went, a lot of those players retired from international level after that, either due to the fact that they just didn't perform well, or that they were just, that was kind of their swan song. They were going to play at the World Cup and then they were going to be done. So Maklas obviously is sort of the biggest name in that squad of a player that went on to kind of shine at the European level. But after that, I'd say that there weren't really many other names. There were some that obviously went on to have good domestic careers, but no one else in that squad really doing a lot outside of Greece.
Despite the disappointment, were there any positives from this adventure? Perhaps just the fact that it actually qualified?
Yeah, I think had things been different, even if Greece had lost all three games, if they had been more competitive, if they had scored a few goals, if the games had been sort of more even, if they had made a better account of themselves, then we probably would look back on this not with such a sort of oh my gosh, how did that happen? I think you look back on it and it's a sore spot for Greek football supporters, because what was supposed to be a real joyous moment, a real sort of crowning achievement of the national team in their history, was something looked back upon with just misery, really. But again, it was sort of all the things we hear about that happen behind the scenes as well that play into that. Yeah, we take that because that's one of Greece's now 3 World Cup appearances. So it enters the history book always as being part of Greece's World Cup story. But it just seems like such a missed opportunity that was supposed to be something to celebrate, but in the end is something that few want to go back and revisit that are associated with Greek football.
On a personal level, what were your impressions and that of your family at the time?
Oh, it was it was a tough time period for being, a Greek football fan. For me, it was a real reality check as far as what football is like at that level, and hope will certainly bring you far and you should always dream. And I think 10 years later, none of us thought that Greece was going to win a Euro, and it just shows that anything can happen. But it was a reminder of maybe let's not miss the signs as we go. Blind optimism maybe is something that should be checked. And I know when I was reading coverage and things like that about friendlies or whatever, I kind of just dismissed that. I'm like, they'll be fine when the tournament starts. But there's something to be said about how a team gets ready for something. And I think we all saw the warning signs, even if we tried to avoid them in the lead up to the tournament. Yeah, it was a tough time it was just sad because we were very excited about the tournament. So my whole family and friends and things were just all geared up and ready to go. And it was just such a letdown that, yeah, it was tough to get over. If you ask me, like, would I feel like that and trade it to be able to have the Euro win? Yes, obviously I would, because that was something in our whole lives as fans will never forget. So the trauma maybe is not so much anymore because we've been able to enjoy other good moments in Greek football history. But during that time, yeah, it was just, I was bummed. It was just tough to see the team do that poorly.
Unsurprisingly, Panagoulias resigned just after the World Cup. Do you feel his reputation has been tarnished as a result, or is he still regarded as one of the all time great Greek managers?
Both. I mean, his reputation was undoubtedly tarnished by being a part of this sort of journey of the Greek national team in the '94 World Cup. And like I said, he is not, for me, the center point, the blame. I think he carries some of the blame. I don't think maybe the organization on the pitch was enough, but you're looking at one of the most successful Greek national team coaches of all time. We obviously talk about Otto Rahagel and his reign before Euro 2000 and for the time period that he was there, about 7 years. But after that, it's probably Panagoulias who's next on the list as far as who goes down in Greek football history. Obviously, Fernando Santos warrants a mention as well after Rahagel. But for me, Panagoulias is somebody to be highly regarded. I think he did a lot of great work with the national team in his 3 stints. He was obviously able to qualify for 2 major tournaments, which is for a team like Greece is no small feat. We're still not a team that consistently makes major tournaments. So it's been 10 years, over 10 years since we've qualified for one. So I think both. I think Panagoulias certainly did not escape unscathed after the '94 World Cup, but history, I think, looks back on him as somebody who was an important figure, specifically for the national team in its history.
In closing, what is the legacy of this World Cup for Greece in historical, cultural, and sociological terms?
I think as far as Greek football history goes, it remains, besides being the first World Cup to qualify for, I think it remains a lesson. Greek football has traditionally been able to produce some really great players. It's been able to produce good coaches. However, in order to compete at the highest level, being a smaller country, you need to make sure that you are organized. You need to make sure that you are united, and you need to make sure that you are properly prepared for the battles that come, especially when you're going into major tournaments. So I think that tournament really is a lesson for Greece. It's a lesson for anybody that is from a maybe not so well known national team, that you can do well, but if you don't prepare, there's a good chance that not only you will not do well, but you could really be embarrassed. So I think that is something that even to this day is spoken about in Greek football circles. So that tournament is brought up, and Greece has gone on to do better things at national team level, but that tournament is a thorn, and when you look back on it, though, it is something that if any positive can come from it now, it's maybe that we can't just overlook all the pieces that need to be in place, from the federation to the manager to the team and everything surrounding it, to be able to kind of put them together to compete and be competitive. So I think that's what the secret of Euro 2004 was. The Greek Football Federation, the manager, and the players were all on the same page. They were pulling together in the same direction. And whether Greece had gone on to win the tournament or not, I think the way that they approached it and the sort of professional outlook they had was something that was in stark contrast to what had happened 10 years before. So the game in Greece at the moment is in a decent place, but I don't think we'll ever get so good that you won't look back on the 1994 World Cup debacle as something to take lessons from, especially when you're, like I said, a smaller to mid-sized country that maybe doesn't have the football history of some of the more elite nations.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information and the link to your book are listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, George, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on Greek football history.
Sean, thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, it's a pleasure, and I'd be glad to come back and talk Greek football with you again. So thank you.
Thank you.